Hi, I'm Owen from Bite Size Irish Gaelic, and welcome to episode number 13, ever a trídeag of the Bite Size Irish Gaelic podcast. Even if you're alone learning to speak Irish outside of Ireland, don't despair. Rest assured that there are thousands like you across the globe, all interested in tapping into Ireland's native culture. And for all about this podcast, go to www.bitesizeirishgaelic.com/podcast. Now, for this show, I'm really happy to be joined by Robert Todd. Robert, how are you doing?
Time goma.
Oh, gohuntach. You were in Ireland recently and we started kind of emailing. So the reason I was especially interested in getting you on the podcast, I actually mentioned you in our last podcast. Because what you had emailed, you had said that you had gone and visited Ireland for, it sounds like, a few weeks, and you tried out Irish on the locals. So I'll ask you some of that as we go on, but tell me, whereabouts in the world are you and what do you do?
Right now, as we're talking, I'm in Atlanta, and I live in Atlanta, Georgia, in the USA. And as I was telling you earlier, I'm a university professor, and the university here in Atlanta is where I've been for many long years. So I'm a native, actually, too, Southerner, so I don't know if you'll hear that in my accent or not, but I'm a card-carrying Southerner.
Oh, explain that to me, card-carrying Southern.
We have people always when we travel, and this happened actually in Ireland too, who find out I'm from Atlanta, I'm from Georgia, so they think, what, Gone with the Wind or Coca-Cola or whatever, and they want to hear the accent, and they're really disappointed because I guess mine's not as strong as it's supposed to be.
No, that's true. I wouldn't have guessed, but I'm no expert, but I wouldn't have guessed that you were a Southerner, say.
It comes out now and again.
My boss at work, he's a lovely guy, and he's from Cork, so he has to be a lovely guy. And we can always tell when, for example, he comes off the phone, if he's after talking to somebody in Cork, or if he's been in Cork for the weekend, because that next Monday, very strong Cork accent, it comes out, and it takes a day or two to fade back away.
That might actually be the equivalent in Ireland, exactly.
Yeah. So, Robert, you spent, a couple of weeks in Ireland lately?
15 days. It was a 50th birthday trip. So I had all the places in the world to choose from, and I chose Ireland for my 50th birthday.
Oh, excellent. So, Robert, what was your first impression? Did you land in Dublin, was it?
Landed in Dublin. The first impression, I was extremely grateful that the snowstorms that had hit the U.S. didn't keep us from getting there. It almost did.
Oh.
Landed in Dublin, and the first impression was beautiful, bright morning, no snow, fantastic. We got out of the worst of the weather, so we got into a cab, and we were staying in Smithfield. So we were taking our cab there, and we were going to stay in Dublin a few days. And actually, the first time I hit the ground running, that was when I first tried out my Irish on a poor unsuspecting local.
Excellent. So tell me, how did you practice your Irish on some unsuspecting local? Tell me.
Well, of course I had to say good morning and how are you? And there was a very beautiful, lovely lady who was our cab driver, our taxi driver. And of course she didn't expect this, I don't believe. Two Americans compiling into the car, and the first thing I start doing is trying to have a conversation. But she was wonderful. And she apologized, first of all, that she wasn't fluent, but she remembered as she thought she did. And then I laughed and said, well, you can't be any worse than I am. And then that started a good conversation.
Okay, it's catching me off guard, because if I was visiting Dublin and I was getting into a cab, I would feel quite, I don't know what I'd call it, maybe a bit bold for trying to practice a bit of Irish on a poor Dublin taxi driver. But let's step back a second, right? Had you studied Irish much? Was it a couple of phrases you had? Give us an idea of your kind of self-assessed level.
Very much a beginner level, and I had tried a few tools in the past and really not gotten particularly far. So it was on the level of polite phrases and questions such as where is something, and it really just polite phrases. I had learned more from Bite Size, which is one reason I wrote you, to let you know that it was working. I had learned to go a little further than
Oh,
that,
cool.
and not much, just a tiny bit. And of course, I did start off. I knew better than to scare the poor lady, so we started off in English, chatting just a bit, and she was very, very chatty. And so I said, "Well, would you mind if I try this with you?"
Oh,
And she looked at me kind of strangely, but then she smiled and she laughed and said, "Give it a try."
hmm.
I did give it a little bit of a lead up, and to be honest, I feel bad for all the taxi drivers in Dublin because I really put them through their paces. Um, but everyone was very kind once I said, would you mind?"
Did you try it on other taxi drivers or
Oh, yes,
yes?
everyone.
Hmm.
And not only that, but the on-off bus drivers, the wonderful tourist buses.
They just like go around in a circle, right? And you can just like jump on and jump off.
You jump on, jump off, and if you don't, it's a way to get to some sites you want to see. It's a wonderful way to get around. Even with them, coming on the bus, leaving the bus, making a comment or two, they were all very willing to respond, at least with a thank you or hope you enjoyed
Cool.
it, and little things like that.
So you would throw at them like Gurv Mahagut, thank you.
Gurv Mahagut,
That's
Gohalin.
mm.
No, I don't even remember what all the things I would say now.
You can say Slán.
Yeah, Slangulat, or whatever. I can't remember which version
Excellent.
at the time, but we would just do little phrases. And actually, one of the on-off bus drivers, some of them are very amusing. Their patter, it's fun. It's really
Yeah.
entertaining. He threw in some Irish Gaelic, and I think he sort of did it as a nod to the crazy American who would come on talking to him in Irish.
That's cool. So, what do you think? What was kind of the general reaction or specific reactions to like? Did people ask you why you had learned a bit of Irish, or were they surprised, or did you get smiles on their faces?
I definitely got smiles. I think it was unexpected, and I think I got smiles also because a couple of the individuals I talked to, one of them was a grocer and one was a cab driver, said, "You make me feel terrible that I haven't kept this up. I need to work on my Irish." But there was a smile, and I think that it was a good surprise on their part. So I didn't have anyone shut me down and say, I've been to other countries where I've tried
Yeah, cool.
as a non-native speaker just to try a little bit of polite phrases and, introductions. And sometimes the reactions are better than others, depending on on the country and your pronunciation. And my Irish pronunciation, I'm sure, is pretty terrible. Everyone was very friendly, and no one gave me any difficulty.
Cool. I'll just say it's very good pronunciation, so well done to you. I'm trying to understand, right? Because do you kind of put yourself in this type of position, not just for visiting Irish or visiting Ireland and speaking Irish? Like, I'm asking this because let's say if I'm traveling and visiting Germany, just for example, and I want to maybe say something, or it's a bad example, I don't know how to say it, but like I'll do my best not to put myself in harm's way. So I won't even try out a phrase if I don't have to, or put myself in a position where somebody might look at me funny. Do you get what I'm saying?
I know what you mean, and I will adapt to the situation, of course. And there are times when it's simply not appropriate. I understand that. But I also knew that I only had a little over 2 weeks in Ireland, right? And I knew that not everyone was going to speak it. So I had to be just a little bit bold and try to maybe charm them a bit to get them to work with me, or else I wasn't going to get any practice at all.
Because let's be clear, you would not have heard any spoken Irish in Dublin anyway.
I actually did.
Oh,
Strangely enough. Very only in a few instances, and I was waiting for it, so of course my ears would prick up when I would hear it. But it was rare. I didn't hear it frequently.
did you really hear it, or was it like just a thick English Irish accent, Irish English accent? Or no.
Oh, no, no, no. I know the difference there, although I love the Hiberno English accent. I think it's very charming. I know the difference. So we went past a couple at a restaurant that was speaking too quickly for me to really keep up, but I could tell it was definitely Irish.
Wow.
That happened once, and then there was one other occasion in a museum where there was a brief, and I do mean brief conversation. So I don't know whether it was someone practicing deliberately or whether it was just running into some locals who were maybe from the West.
That's cool because I've said it like on the podcast, and we'd say it on Bite Size Irish Gaelic blog and stuff like that. That unless you go seeking Irish, you'd be very lucky to hear it. So I'm very happy to hear that you did hear spoken Irish, and like you're proving me wrong a bit, and I'm very happy to be proven wrong.
It was rare, but it was there. So, and then of course, a couple of times, I would say something like "I'm digging to Galen,"
Mm.
just to break the ice. And I did have a couple of head shakes, no, and I'm sorry about that. But to be honest, actually, most of them knew a little bit. They just were as probably as reluctant as a tourist to try it, if that makes any sense.
Cool. And I'd like to just note that if there's like beginners of Irish listening to this, and do you want to repeat what you said again, Robert?
"I'm digging to Galen."
Lovely. And that means, do you understand Irish? Now, I just want to point out that Robert used the word Goylan, which is the Munster name for like the Munster language or the Irish language, right?
That's yes.
So you're definitely leaning towards the Munster version of saying stuff. Now, the more standard written and kind of nationally used word is Gaeilge, which you'll also hear. But I'm very happy that you're using that word. I just want to point out to the listeners that they'd be thinking, what's that word? Am I learning the wrong word? Wait a second. So just say, no, you're not learning the wrong word. Use whatever word you want to use.
I think I picked that up in Dingle,
Oh,
so
lovely.
that probably makes sense.
Yeah, we have an old blog post on Bite Size Irish Gaelic, and it doesn't say Tá Gaeilge an Seo. There is Irish here in the shop. It says Tá Gaelin an Seo. So I love that.
Sure.
Lovely. So, yeah, you mentioned Dingles, so I'm interested to hear a bit more about your trip. First of all, did you enjoy being in Dublin?
Very much. As a matter of fact, our comment was, well, in Ireland in general, we said if we'd stayed another day, we would have been looking for a green card. But yeah, Dublin, I did. My goal, really, the most important one to me, was to get to the West, and I wanted to. I've had some interest in various locales, but the West was important to me, and the seacoast and the extraordinary physical beauty of the West, of course, and that's a big draw for many people, I think. But I also wanted to go to an Irish-speaking region, so I thought I can do both at the same time, and we spent about half the trip in Dublin, and then taking trips to the Hill of Tara and to Newgrange, which Newgrange, by the way, is where I spent my birthday.
Oh, excellent.
Which is very memorable.
Mm.
And it happened to be at the time when the sun is, doing the solstice trick there.
Explain Newgrange or Brúnaboine to us.
Brúnaboine, which was absolutely spectacular. We visited, there was a extraordinary tour that left from Dublin with an archaeologist leading it that took us to the Hill of Tara and to the Brúnaboine, the Boyne Valley, and to Newgrange, the Neolithic monument that's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. I'm sure many Irishmen know. And, I'm not your typical guy. When it's my birthday, I guess I could go down the road for pizza, but instead I had to be at Newgrange when the solstice was happening and the sun was going to shine into the chamber. So, so there was a lot of effort that went into that.
And did you see the sun come through?
Absolutely.
Wow, that's very special.
It wasn't quite as bright as, it wasn't Florida, it wasn't Miami's sun, but it got there.
Okay. I guess I can't blame the sun being the shortest day of the Irish winter. It's going to be a weak sun, but that's so cool because it's very often that you'd see news reports each year that it was just cloudy and there was no sunshine to mark the shortest day. But you were very lucky.
This year there actually was sun on the day of the solstice, and it was on the television that we saw when we had already traveled to Dingle then, but it just peeked through before on my birthday. And, there's a lottery to get there on the actual day of the solstice. But what most people don't know is you've got a space of a few days there.
What do you mean?
The effect happens. It's a very magical effect. It's really is magical. It can send chills down your spine. It happens just for a few days around the solstice. This little shaft of light will go through into the inner chamber, the innermost chamber of Newgrange. And suddenly what's been in darkness, for 5,000 years, what's been in darkness most all of that time is illuminated by this one thin shaft of light, and it's an inner chamber that's built. It's extraordinary workmanship, and it's Neolithic. We're talking 5,000 years, so you have a sense that there's something magical, something special happening.
That's really impressive. And Yeah, when you put stuff in the perspective of that time span and think back, I'm going to put myself in trouble now, but that would be pre-Celtic times. Robert, can you back me up there?
Hmm.
Or
I can back you up, and actually, Professor Gibbons, who gave us the tour, would be able to tell you a lot about that, but definitely pre-Celtic.
yeah, so it would be questionable whether we even know, for example, what language those people were speaking at the time. I find that very interesting. This is pre-Irish.
It's and the markings on Brunaboyne in general and on Newgrange and the other sites like it, no one knows what they mean.
Mm,
The triple spiral that's so popular and famous in
mm,
Ireland, that's where it comes from.
wow, yeah. And when you think back, like the Irish language itself has been a language, it seems, about 2 millennia. But that's really just a blow-in language to Ireland when you put it in the perspective of 5,000 years. I find it pretty impressive.
It's very impressive. But at least you have the distinction with Irish of I believe, the oldest non-classical tongue written in the West, right?
Mm,
So it's a tongue with a great heritage, even if it is much younger than 5,000 years.
excellent. So bring us along your trip. You made it west to County Kerry.
We did County Kerry, and the winds were too strong, so we couldn't fly. We got bussed over, and we got to see a couple of nice places in the south on the way. But Kerry, we decided we were going to stay in a stone cottage on the northern side of the Dingle Peninsula, near the very isolated village of Clahane. So we were out far away from pretty much anyone. You could hear the surf in the distance through the woods, and you could see Mount Brandon snow-capped and a beautiful stream running past this stone cottage. It was an idyllic situation. Beautiful.
Wow. Just on the organizational side of things, like, was this like a cottage that you rented for a week?
We rented it for just over a week, and it was easy to find. There's homeaway.com and other
Mm.
places like that. To be honest, it took me almost no time to find it. I simply typed in Dingle and typed in, the type of place we wanted, and I found it very quickly.
Excellent. And were you driving?
We drove, and we had a great time driving.
Cool. So was that a scary experience or was it all right?
We've done it before briefly, but this time we became more comfortable. We spent 8 days driving intensely around the Ring of Kerry, the Dingle Peninsula. Christmas Day. Christmas Day, we had a white Christmas if you could get up to the top of Connor Pass, and I wanted a white Christmas, so we got in our little rental car with its bald tires, and we went up Connor Pass on ice.
Wow.
So, we're a little courageous, maybe more so than a lot of tourists.
That's excellent. And you spent Christmas in Ireland, so that's lovely. What I'm going to do, I will put a photo or a couple of photos of the Connor Pass that I have. It's this beautiful spot. It's on the Dingle Peninsula, Kirkagwina. So the road winds up on one side and it's a bit more steep on the other side. But when you get to the top, you can get out of your car and you see some crazy cyclists who've gone that far too. And the view is just breathtaking and it's usually very windy up there. Yeah, it's just lovely.
And don't forget the sheep.
Oh, plenty of sheep. Yeah.
Clinging to the rocks above and below your car. And I think it scares a lot of folks, especially if they're not used to driving on the left side. But I was determined because it was beautiful and snow-capped. And then once you're there, the vistas are one of a kind.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm very happy to hear that you were able to, first arrange to be there around Christmas time. Second, to be courageous enough to drive up the Connor Pass on an icy Christmas morning. And I'd point people back to episode 6 of the podcast where I was talking with Felicity, and a writer and author, and she spends about half her time, maybe less, on the Dingle Peninsula and the rest of her time in London. And she was sharing her perspectives of the Dingle Peninsula during winter, so I found that very interesting. Robert, you were here in Ireland during some stormy weather. You mentioned What was that like? Because Ireland really was hit with a storm once or twice.
I have the photograph when we were in the cottage on the peninsula, the photograph in the paper the next day that said, I believe, worst storm in 25 years, hurricane level winds. So we stayed tightly locked up in the cottage. I made sure around 1 a.m. that the sea wasn't actually going to come into the cottage. But other than that, it was kind of just like a Wuthering Heights experience. Where the rain was going horizontal outside and the trees were bending. It was a little excitement. But other than losing power for a few hours, we turned out fine. And all we did was say, okay, fine, we're just going to drive into Killarney. And power was there in Killarney. And by the time we got back, all was well. It was very impressive, though. And you definitely feel the elements and you know that you're on this little piece of land on the edge of a great sea.
Pretty impressive. What was your perspective of Killarney town, which we'll say is in Kerry also?
We loved Killarney, and it was a little bit of a surprise. We were there during the Christmas shopping, heavy Christmas shopping time, just before the actual holiday, and we thought it was really charming that there was traditional Christmas music that was broadcast through the streets. People were rushing about with their packages. Santa was there in the middle of the center market area of the town, and we just had a great time enjoying, the town that seemed to have a lot of spirit.
Yeah, Kerry people, they're feisty. Kerry people are, you can't hold the Kerry man down.
Well, definitely not with Christmas shopping, I can promise you. And
God.
they really did it right. To be honest, to us, it almost felt like being transported back in time to a traditional, almost movie Christmas set, if that makes any sense. And it was just a nice experience. And then we immediately after, there was La et le Stéphane, the St. Stephen's Day, which comes right afterwards. I hope I said that in a way that was understandable.
Very good.
St. Stephen's Day, we drove into Dingle. We used the pass again because it was our quickest way from the north side of the peninsula to get there. And we encountered the Wren Boys. So we went right from Christmas to St. Stephen's Day, and the Wren Boys were out and playing their instruments in costumes and mummers' costumes and looking for a penny for the wren. And so the holidays kept going.
So can you explain a bit to listeners what's involved with Wren's Day?
I just think that's a charming custom. It really is. It reminds me of Halloween here in the U.S., which of course we owe to the Irish as well. But on St. Stephen's Day, and I don't know all the details, but I know that children and adults all get involved in it. The children will go about in bands wearing costumes. Actually, some of the most bizarre costumes I've ever seen, and I have to give them tremendous credit for their creativity. But they don't just come by asking for a penny for the wren or some kind of gift of money. They came by playing instruments and carrying banners and dancing and actually entertaining. So it was really, I'm imagining you don't see that everywhere in Ireland, but in the little rural area where we stayed, we did. And then we went into Dingle, where of course the parades were the different, I'm not sure what you call them, troops were sort of competing in the city, wearing their mummers outfits and dancing and lots of music and a good time.
Yeah, from what I understand in Dingle, there's like, as you said, like a troupe representing each main street in the town. So they parade up and, I don't know, do they meet in the middle?
I don't know if they should meet or not because they seem to be very competitive. So I don't know. I definitely wouldn't have put them together, but I think they were all doing it in good fun, in all seriousness. But there was the green and the gold, I remember. There were several, but they all represented a street. There was Goat Street, for example, and that was the first troop we ran into.
So I can guess, were there some goat costumes, or was there a goat?
There was sort of a pseudo goat, but they were truly some of the most odd costumes. There were some bands of leprechauns, which the children all loved. And then there was the really traditional mummers, straw basket kind of hats. And I've only seen those in folklore books and in documentaries before, so it stunned me to see that on the streets.
Yeah, actually, I don't know that mummer word. I wouldn't have a name for them myself. Yeah, so interesting. My wife, Sasha, she's from Slovenia, and sometime during autumn, they have a kind of a similar old festival, and the straw costumes that they wear then are very similar to what you see in Dingle on the day of the wren. So it's interesting. I wonder how far back these traditions go.
That one's interesting because, of course, I asked to find as much about it as I could. And many people theorize its ancient pagan origins, the custom. Others say, well, no, maybe it only goes back to the Middle Ages. But nevertheless, we're talking something pretty old.
Hmm. Oh, that's cool. I have to step back a bit again and ask, do you have an Irish background yourself?
Way back, Irish ancestry that I uncovered when doing work on our genealogy for our family a long time back, but before actually the Great Famine. So we've been here a long time in the States, but also I have ancestors that are Scots. So there's just a tendency, there's an interest on my part on that side of the family, which makes up a large part of our family. And I see sort of like a Celtic connection there. And if you've talked to a lot of folks from the States, you know that sense of roots and searching for ancestry, it's very important to us.
Sure, yeah. And was it known in your family that you had those connections?
Not at all. As a matter of fact, when I was a child
Hmm.
and I used to ask questions, they would say, well, I guess we're just English. Well, maybe so, but I wasn't certain. So I started doing the research and I found out otherwise. So, like many Americans, we're sort of mutts. We're blend to a degree. But I know a lot of folks now, like me, are using Ancestry.com and other services and even doing genetics testing to figure out more about their heritage and to kind of confirm or disprove those results. But yeah, there's definitely the connection for both the Irish and the Scots in our family that's important to us.
Hmm. Back in episode 11, I was speaking with Liam, who lives in the States, but he calls Ireland home, and he owns a nice cottage in County Tipperary, and they're visiting over just as we're recording this. But do you feel when you land in Ireland, do you feel some type of emotional connection with the place?
Absolutely. And I think I told you that I chose this was a case of a special birthday and a trip that had been saved up for and special trip. And I chose Ireland because there's where I felt longtime student of Irish literature and Irish myths and legends and history and you name it.
Mm.
So I had to be careful not to go too quickly when I got there trying to see it all.
Was this your first time in Ireland?
This was my first time in Ireland. I've done a lot of travels, but it was just the first time that it worked out for me.
Hmm. So let's say somebody who also hasn't made the trip home to Ireland yet, would you have one or two pieces of advice for them for preparing for before they get to Ireland and, what to do in Ireland or how to treat their trip?
I could go on for a long time there. I would say that if you have immersed yourself a bit in the culture of the country, and if you felt that kind of call deep down in your heart that says this, well, is home, perhaps, like you said, you're probably going to have very little difficulty finding yourself wanting to stay or at least come back quickly. For me, everything I use the word, and I don't want this to sound trite, I used the word magic a couple of times as we were talking, but that's how it felt.
Mm.
The play of light on the seacoast in Dingle, as we would stand at Fermoil Beach, for example, that alone was numinous. So I felt a sense of connectedness and rootedness.
Mm.
And so just trying to immerse myself a bit in what's going on actually in the culture, like going for St. Stephen's Day and participating as opposed to running away to some more tourist type of location, made all the difference. We felt very connected because we were going shopping for groceries and bringing them back to the home we rented. We got to speak to the locals. We got to chat with them and daily, probably like people who were living there. We got to at least have those little connections. So to me, I think that makes, obviously the big sites are critical. They're important. And the Stone of Destiny on Tara Hill, of course, you see that. But also just immersing yourself by doing what the locals are doing and meeting them, I think makes it a lot more powerful.
That's excellent advice, I think, because you can be on vacation and you can be taking it easy, but be whisked around and visit different places. And if you don't start feeling that connection with the locals themselves, you've kind of missed a bit of the place you're visiting. So I think it was lovely that renting a cottage, I think, was an excellent idea. And like you said, you go shopping and you feel you're part of the place for a little while. So that's excellent.
just for a little while. That, I think, it provided that powerful heart connection that you might not get if you're only running from, a cathedral to an ancient ruin, and you just run from one to the other. I think that helped. Like, for example, I heard someone in Dingle say, well, there's going to be a Christmas Day swim. The locals are all going to run, and some of them wearing Santa hats are all going to run into this frigid Arctic Ocean, right? So we took a harrowing trip to Dunshin Beach, because they moved it to this little out-of-the-way beach, a harrowing trip down a narrow road with cars flying in both directions. And we got there for that swim. And then we met, and what happened when we got there, a little-known event, they were stunned that anybody from outside the community had even bothered to show for this. And then we met this lovely woman named Catherine on the beach with her dog, Kara, whom I called Ahara, and she was very impressed and let me meet Kara, and meaning friend, if I understand correctly.
Excellent, yeah.
And when I called her Ahara and she came to me, she said, oh, you know her name. And so we started chatting. It turns out this lovely woman lives several months of the year on Skellig Michael, and I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly, but an extraordinary heritage site in Ireland.
Yeah, Skellig Michael.
Very good. I'm glad you did that because I was afraid to. But she told us all about her. She's a local, and well, she was really from Wexford, but she, was local, and told us that all about the island and its beauty and how we should come back, and we plan to do that. That would never have happened if we had just run from one tourist spot to the next.
Absolutely agreed. And I hope you can make it back. I'm going to put this challenge to our listeners that you heard how Robert was able to learn a couple of expressions. He had the interest and he tried a bit of Irish on even Dublin taxi drivers. I'm impressed, I have to say, Robert.
They were my favorites because they were on a level better than me, but not so much better than me. So it was easy. In Dingle, I had to really work hard.
Oh, yeah, I was in O'Flaherty's pub in Dingle, and I was ordering my Guinness in Irish, and he threw back some mighty Irish at me. I was struggling to keep up because it was just fluent local version of Irish he had. I think he was putting me up to the test.
Can you imagine how it was for me?
Yeah.
So although they were very kind, it was a different level. And I love the fact that the folks in Dublin were maybe a little shakier and were very humble. Along with me, we were both very humble about it.
I like that. It's a good point, and it's a good reason for practicing your Irish while you're around in Dublin and elsewhere. So, Robert, would it be okay if any listeners have a question that they can leave a comment on the show notes page and ask you any questions they might have? Is that okay?
That's very much okay with me.
Excellent. So, Robert, thanks for your time. We hopefully will talk again.
Gur magat.
Gur míle magat, Robert, a reward. Asta chuidama for your time. So we'll finish up. It was lovely talking to Robert. And so to leave a comment for Robert, what you do is go to bitesizeirishgaelic.com/podcast. and just navigate to episode number 13, and you can leave a reply on the page, and it's just a comment on the blog. If you're loving the show, the best you can do is go to iTunes to leave us a 5-star written review. And I have to say, I'm a bit sad there's no reviews to report since our last episode, so please do go to iTunes and leave your written review for us. You can write to me, Owen, directly. At the email address is podcast@bitesizeirishgaelic.com. Thanks to Tsukumo in Japan for their music, which you hear on this episode under a Creative Commons license. And until the next episode, Slán go fóill. Bye for now.